If you've ever watched Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, you've seen it. A monster hiding beneath the castle. A serpent so ancient it obeys only one bloodline. A creature whose eyes alone can kill. The Basilisk. In the film, it feels like fantasy, magic, spells, and myth woven into a children's story. But what if I told you that long before Hogwarts, before wizards, before cinema itself, people truly believed this creature existed? Imagine a beast so lethal that it doesn't need claws, venom, or fangs. It kills with a glance. One look, and a man collapses where he stands. One breath, and crops rot in the soil. Even stone was said to crack beneath its presence. Medieval travelers whispered its name in fear, not around campfires, but in courts, churches, and scientific texts. The basilisk, not a dragon, not a demon, but something far worse, because dragons could be slain, demons could be exorcised. The basilisk needed no battle. All it had to do was look at you. And now we will uncover the terrifying origins and the enduring legacy of the beast that truly ruled not by fire or force, but by a deadly gaze. If the basilisk sounds like fantasy, it's because we've forgotten where the story truly begins. Not in fairy tales, not in novels, not even in myth, but in ancient science. Long before the Middle Ages wrapped the basilisk in wings and crowns, Greek scholars described a creature they believed walked the earth. They called it Basiliskos, the little king, not because it was large. In fact, some accounts describe it as small, even unimpressive in size. But kings are not crowned by strength alone. The basilisk ruled through terror. According to early Greek natural philosophers, no serpent dared slither near it. Animals fled at its approach, and even lions, symbols of dominance and power, were said to fall dead after meeting its gaze. This was not poetry. Writers like Theophrastus, a student of Aristotle, and later Pliny the Elder, Rome's greatest natural historian, documented the basilisk as a living creature. Pliny placed it alongside lions, elephants, and wolves, not as legend but as fact. He described its breath as poisonous, its trail as deadly, and its stare as instantly fatal. Where it moved, vegetation withered. Where it nested, the land became barren. To the ancient world, the basilisk was not a monster hiding in the dark. It was a biological terror, lurking just beyond the edge of the known world. And once it was written into science, belief followed. Once the basilisk was accepted as real, the next question was not whether it could kill, but how. Ancient writers agreed on one thing above all else. The basilisk did not need to strike. What made it truly terrifying were its eyes. One look, and flesh was said to decay where it stood. Blood curdled in the veins. Limbs failed. Life ended instantly. This was not ordinary venom. The gaze of the basilisk was believed to carry poison itself, a lethal force so concentrated that death traveled faster than touch. Some accounts went even further. They claimed that even reflected sight could be fatal. To look upon the basilisk through water, metal, or glass was to invite death all the same. One Roman legend tells of a man who believed he had outwitted the beast. He killed a basilisk with a spear, keeping his distance, never meeting its eyes, but victory was an illusion. The creature's poison traveled up the weapon, through wood, through iron, and into the man's hands. The man collapsed. His horse followed moments later. The lesson was brutal and unmistakable. Distance offered no safety. You could not stab it. You could not trap it. You could not even look at it. The basilisk did not hunt like an animal. It erased life by its mere existence. And once that idea took hold, the basilisk became something more than a creature. It became a death sentence with eyes. Once the basilisk became a creature that could kill without contact, It could no longer remain just an animal. Fear does not stay still. It evolves. In the earliest Roman accounts, the basilisk was still a serpent, small, sleek, and deadly. Pliny described it as bearing a white marking upon its head, shaped like a crown or diadem. This mark alone set it apart. It was not merely poisonous, it was royal, a king among serpents. But as the Roman world collapsed and medieval Europe rose from its ruins, the basilisk began to change. Slowly at first, then grotesquely. Medieval artists and scholars no longer saw the basilisk as something nature had produced. They saw it as something nature had betrayed. The serpent grew legs, then wings. A sharp beak replaced its mouth. A rooster's crest crowned its head. The basilisk became a hybrid, half serpent, half bird, neither fully earthbound nor of the sky. A creature that should not exist. This transformation was not accidental. In medieval thought, monsters were moral statements. Anything that violated the natural order was seen as a sign of sin, heresy, or divine punishment. The basilisk's twisted body became a warning, proof that the world itself could rot when God's laws were broken. No longer just a killer, the basilisk became corruption made flesh. A living embodiment of pride, forbidden knowledge, and spiritual decay. By the Middle Ages, to encounter a basilisk was not simply to die. It was to face judgment. If the basilisk's body was a violation of nature, then its birth was an outright blasphemy. Medieval scholars did not believe such a creature could be born in any ordinary way. A monster this unnatural required an origin just as corrupt. According to medieval belief, the basilisk hatched from an egg laid by a rooster. Not a hen, a rooster. An impossible act, one that shattered the natural order itself. The egg, it was said, was then incubated not by warmth or care, but by a toad or a serpent, creatures already associated with poison, decay, and the underworld. Every step of this birth was wrong. Male became female, bird became reptile, nurture became corruption, life became death. To the medieval mind, this was not metaphor, it was inversion, a sacred concept turned inside out. Christian theology taught that evil did not create, it perverted. And the basilisk was the perfect example, a creature born not through divine design but through the deliberate twisting of God's order. This is why the basilisk terrified the faithful. It was not just dangerous, it was proof that the world could be corrupted from its very beginning, that even birth itself could become an act of rebellion. The basilisk was not merely born, it was manufactured by sin. And once something like that existed, the question was no longer where it came from, but how God allowed it to exist at all. If the basilisk was born from sin, then it was inevitable that it would find a home in Scripture. Medieval scholars did not read the Bible as metaphor alone, they read it as a map of reality. And within that map, the basilisk began to appear. In several medieval translations of the Old Testament, the word basilisk emerges as a name for the deadliest of serpents. It appears alongside vipers and adders, creatures already associated with the fall. But the basilisk stood apart. It was not simply poisonous, it was corrupting. Christian theologians interpreted the basilisk as a living symbol of Satan, not as a roaring beast, but as something quieter and more insidious. Sin, they taught, does not always attack. Sometimes it only needs to be seen. The basilisk did not overpower its victims. It destroyed them through exposure, through pride, through forbidden knowledge, through the desire to look where one should not. Just as Eve saw the fruit in the Garden of Eden, no force was used. No violence was required. One look was enough. To medieval minds, this made the basilisk more terrifying than any dragon. A dragon threatened the body. The basilisk threatened the soul. To meet its gaze was not just to die, it was to fall. And in that way, the basilisk became more than a creature of legend. It became a warning, a reminder that the deadliest evils do not announce themselves with claws and fire. They wait until you choose to look. If the basilisk was sin given flesh, then the question was no longer academic. It was urgent, because monsters like this could not be ignored. Medieval scholars, monks, and natural philosophers were forced to confront an impossible problem. How do you kill something that cannot be touched? Swords were useless. Spears were death sentences. Even distance offered no safety. So medieval bestiaries turned not to strength but to cunning. The most famous solution was the mirror. It was said that the basilisk's gaze, when turned inward upon itself, became self-destructive. Seeing its own reflection, the creature would die instantly, undone by the very power that made it king. To medieval thinkers, this was not just a tactic. It was a moral lesson. Pride, when forced to confront itself, becomes lethal. But mirrors were rare, and approaching the basilisk at all was almost always fatal. So another answer emerged, darker, smaller, and more tragic. The weasel. Medieval texts claimed the weasel was immune to the basilisk's poison and gaze. Hunters would release it into the creature's lair, sealing the entrance behind it. Inside, the weasel would attack, tearing at the basilisk until it lay dead. But the victory never lasted. The poison lingered. The weasel would stagger from the lair and die shortly after. The message was unmistakable. Even when evil was defeated, innocence paid the price. The basilisk could be killed, but never without sacrifice. And that belief would follow the creature far beyond the Middle Ages. Even after the basilisk could be killed, its shadow did not fade. In fact, it grew larger. Because once fear enters the real world, it no longer needs the monster itself. During the Middle Ages, death often came without warning. Crops failed, wells turned foul, villages sickened overnight. Plague moved faster than understanding. And when people did not know why they were dying, they searched for something, anything to blame. The basilisk became the perfect answer. Invisible, silent, lethal. Medieval records describe towns accusing basilisks of nesting in ruins, caves, and especially abandoned wells, places where death seemed to rise from the earth itself. Wells were sealed, tunnels collapsed, buildings were abandoned and left to rot. Entire villages fled not from invading armies or approaching armies, but from a creature no one could prove existed. Authorities took these fears seriously. City councils ordered inspections. Clergy performed blessings and exorcisms. Chronicles recorded basilisks as plausible causes of catastrophe. Fear did not need evidence. It only needed coincidence. A dead cow, a poisoned stream, a sudden illness. And once the idea took hold, panic spread faster than any serpent. The basilisk was no longer a creature of legend, it had become a diagnosis. Eventually, something began to change, not in the world, but in the way humans understood it. As science advanced and superstition slowly retreated, the basilisk vanished from medical texts, court records, and official explanations for disaster. But monsters like this do not disappear. They transform. The basilisk retreated into alchemy, where it symbolized deadly substances, hidden reactions, and knowledge too dangerous to handle without wisdom. In heraldry, it became a symbol of power, a warning that authority itself could be lethal when abused. And in literature, the basilisk found a new home. No longer blamed for plagues, it was reborn as metaphor. A guardian of forbidden places, a test of worthiness, a punishment for those who look too closely. In modern fantasy, from Harry Potter to role-playing games and novels, the basilisk remains instantly recognizable. The body may change, the setting may shift, but one thing never disappears: the gaze, the idea that sight itself can destroy you. That knowledge, once seen, cannot be unseen. The basilisk no longer lives in wells or ruins. It lives in stories, warning us that some truths carry a cost. Today, we no longer fear a serpent hiding in the dark, waiting to kill us with its eyes. Science has drained the poison from wells, mapped the land, and named the diseases that once arrived without warning. And yet the basilisk has not vanished. It has simply changed where it lives. In myth, the basilisk was a warning about pride, about forbidden knowledge, and about forces we believed were too powerful to confront directly. It punished not violence but curiosity, not strength but sight, because to see something was to risk being changed by it. The most dangerous monsters were never the ones that hunted us through forests or caves. They were the ones we created to give shape to our fear of the unknown. The basilisk was not just a creature, it was a mirror. And even now, in a world filled with screens, information, and instant knowledge, the warning still holds. Some truths arrive without claws or fangs. Some dangers do not chase us. They wait until we choose to look. And sometimes, all it takes to be undone is a gaze.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.